so good.
Sure. Well, yeah, exactly. I know how hard you guys are working during this period. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for everything. We are all working together as one community to, get through this time and stay together. So thank you.
Very good. So I gather there's some questions, Rich, that...
Yeah, so yeah.
By all means.
Sure. So I have a few opening remarks. I'll just thank some of the nonprofit Westchester folks joining. Then I would just like to frame some of the issues that have come up with our members and that, folks want to hear some comments on. I'll give you guys the floor to, kind of address some of those concerns, and then we'll just do a little conversation and Q&A towards the end, if that's okay.
It's fine with us.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, nonprofit Westchester audience. We have 100 folks RSVP'd today, and very grateful to the county executive, the deputy county executive, and your team for spending some time with your favorite sector, the nonprofit sector. I'm Rich Nightingale. I am the vice president of MPW and the head of our public policy committee. I'm also, my day job is being the CEO of Westhab. And welcome to all of our members today. Thanks to our president, Anahita Kodval, and all of our board members, all of our members. Nonprofit Westchester is the only nonprofit-specific membership organization. We have nearly 200 members. The vast majority of our members have very valued, important partnerships with the county. We work hand in hand with the county executive and your team to deliver vital services in this county. I also want to thank our staff, our wonderful executive director, Jan Fisher, and Suzanne Gardos for putting today's event together, and also to Arnie Linhart and Strategic Services for sponsoring today's event. In the spirit of time, and I know you guys have things going on, I'm going to dive right in and just speak quickly about some of the, major areas of concern to our membership. And then, of course, this is all about hearing from you. So thanks for enduring me at the front here, okay?
Good, thanks.
So, the nonprofit sector is, an amazingly vital part of our county in good times and bad. And I think in a lot of ways, that's only exacerbated in these additional needs. We serve many vulnerable populations and deliver essential services. So our public policy committee has continued to meet and discuss the issues that are important to our membership, which include things like line of duty benefits for our frontline employees. We are part of the essential workforce, just as nurses and healthcare professionals and grocery store workers. Our staff work in nursing homes, homeless shelters, domestic violence settings, youth programs, so on and so forth. Programs for people with disabilities, childcare centers, food distribution. So our staff and our organizations have certainly been on the front lines throughout this period. And I think very important to our members is flexibility in county contracts to make sure we can absorb additional costs on the staffing side, and just flexibility in general as we, incur unexpected changes to our programs. I think another very critical part of our work is working with disproportionately affected communities. And we know that lower income communities, communities of color, have faced a larger burden in coronavirus impact, and also more often represent the frontline workforce. So that is a major issue that continues to come up in our discussions. Certainly we see the nonprofit sector as being a vital partner, as I said, in good and bad times, and we hope to be your partner in post-pandemic efforts and help with the county's recovery. So we'd love to hear ways that the nonprofit sector can be included in recovery efforts and, in the times ahead. Obviously, on the cost side, we've incurred tremendous PPE costs as we all source the masks and the glove and the equipment that we need to do our work. Just two more for you, I think, and then I know you'll cover a lot. Another issue around disproportionate impact is for young people who are now in distance learning. Not everyone has an internet connection. Not everyone has the technology they need, and we're really very concerned about growing gaps between different students in our county. and making sure that lower income students especially don't fall farther behind. And another critical issue also, essentially on disproportionate impact, is around our immigrant communities. So I know I'm giving you a lot here. Let me pause. We want to hear from you. And obviously,
You're doing fine, Rich. Keep going. We're good.
But frankly, I'm happy to make this conversational. And we really always, the nonprofit sector has always, really appreciated your time and your support. So why don't you just give us a little bit of an overview based on some of those concerns, and then we'll try to field some questions from our members.
Okay. Well, listen, we appreciate the opportunity and the forum. Obviously, this situation we're going through creates this strange universal Zoom or WebEx forums that we have for everything now. And it takes away the human interaction that really is very much a part of what you do and what we do. I'm going to make some general comments about some things, and then Ken has got a comment as well. Let me just start by saying that I think it has to be stated up front every time we communicate with any particular segment of the county, in this case, the not-for-profit segment, is that both Ken and I as individuals are not learning for the first time the value of the not-for-profit world. We've both been involved in significant not-for-profit organizations, social justice organizations. Nobody forgets that Ken was head of the Yonkers NAACP during one of the greatest periods of stressful rallying for social justice that existed in the county's history. My involvements with a number of different not-for-profits personally, before I got into public office on United Way with American Cancer Society and any number of more localized not-for-profits, are part of who we are. And so to some extent, sitting in these offices with executive authority, we draw from those experiences. We also draw from experiences. Both of us have been county legislators. Both of us have chaired the Board of Legislators. Both of us were advocates for funding for not-for-profits in our respective eras. On the legislative side of it, making sure that the executive branch of those days would do the most that they could do at that time for not-for-profit organizations. I had the added experience of being in the state legislature, and for part of that time, member items, which in the district that I represented, we went to bat for organizations, maybe more localized, things like the Carver Center, what's now known as the Community Resource Center, Mamaroneck, and a host of other organizations, Hope Community Services in New Rochelle. Those were things we fought for. So we start from a platform of understanding the value of the not-for-profit organizations. You've heard me say publicly that I view the way we contract with not-for-profit organizations in the same way that I view us contracting with for-profit organizations. When we have a complicated construction project, we turn to, through the bidding process, construction companies, private sector entities that have an experience in something that we don't have internally within the county government. That's why we go out for bids to redo Memorial Field or to fix things in Playland. Similarly, when we look at how are we going to provide services to people that need domestic violence services, we know we don't have the internal expertise to provide that service, the shelters and all of the counseling services to deal with people like that. That's why we contract externally with not-for-profits. And we have both in our career pushed back against people who hold a different political philosophy that argue that when we put money into contracts with not-for-profits, we're just doing, member items for political purposes. They fail to recognize what we know. Now, having said that, in the executive responsibilities that now we have, we're obviously dealing in a world where we have limited funds, and we're trying to figure out how to accomplish the goals and to do it through organizations like those that you represent. And prior to the pandemic, I think in the first two budgets that we had the opportunity to work on, we showed our commitment by increasing the amounts of money in both cases, and we showed the flexibility with the Board of Legislators to add beyond the original proposals in both cases. Now we're in a position of fiscal, I don't know what's the right word to say. We really don't know what's going to happen as we go forward. It is an unsure moment for all of us. The budgets of every organization, individuals, small businesses, not-for-profits, governments, religious institutions, they're all in a questionable period of time. We have to work through providing certain services. And I think from a countywide standpoint, we've seen a couple of examples of that. We were tasked as a county government to work with school districts to help ensure that there was a child care function through the schools that would help those people who were first responders and had children and would have to stay home and not be able to work in a critical area of employment, first response. And so Joan McDonald, Emily Saltzman and their team were able to tackle that problem, which was not traditionally a responsibility of county government, working with Kathy Hallis and the Child Care Council and working with the school districts to do that. And that is an across the board situation all across the county. We've been tasked through our emergency services department to provide personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, gowns, all that stuff, PPE, an acronym that I did not know what it meant 3 months ago, to all sorts of organizations, not just governments, but organizations that provide direct services. And when you have direct contact, then you have to have masks, gloves, gowns, and those types of things. So those are some of the general examples that I think represent what we've done so far. I want Ken obviously to express some of his thoughts in general, and then in specific about some of the things we've done that have been targeted into communities where we know the need is greatest. You know, he's a boy from the Bronx and Mount Vernon and Yonkers. I'm a boy from Mount Vernon, so it's not like we grew up in Beverly Hills. They dropped us off, you know, here in White Plains for these responsibilities. So, Ken, why don't you share some of your thoughts and address some of the localized things that we've been doing?
Thanks, George, and thank you so much for Nonprofit Westchester, certainly our good friend Jan Fisher and all the organizations that are out there that everyone has now understood are valuable partners and are the essential workers that make sure that we're having delivery of services that happen. And as the county executive pointed out, the real challenges for all of us right now is to be creative in this particular time of pandemic and be able to step up. Many of the organizations out there that are part of Nonprofit Westchester are deemed essential by the government, by the ESD and the governor's executive order. And we have been able to be very, very creative and work with many of those organizations. And the county executive mentioned a few of them, but certainly, you know, we have Family Services and Westhab and other organizations feeding Westchester, Child Care Council, as the county executive pointed out, and some others that have stepped up to be able to be creative in this particular time of extreme creativity that's necessary with financial freefall, as the county executive pointed out, and a ton of uncertainty and changes that have gone on. So we've appreciated the partnership with Nonprofit Westchester and the other groups that we have out there, our partners in government, as things have flexed and changed since March 3rd. And we always like to remind people that this started for us in Westchester on March 3rd at 10 minutes to 8 in the morning when the county executive called and said, hey, Ken, we have a positive case in Westchester. And we've been going pretty much full speed from that particular point in time. And again, we appreciate the time that we have today to talk through those kind of creative opportunities and make sure that things are happening. But we're looking forward to hearing the questions and some of the things that we've been doing to be able to be flexible and understand how to plug things in and plug up some of the challenges. But again, we had to make sure that to bring up one point because Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and all of our folks that are at the state level, the governor continues to talk about this. And people may not look at the county government the same way. I'm not quite sure why, but the federal government, the state government said they have a $61 billion deficit, right? And said to the county that we're going to potentially cut in the budget 20% to local governments, 20% to hospitals, and 20% to school districts. And we fit in kind of a bunch of those categories that those cuts could come. We don't know what's going to happen. And again, that's a real challenge in part because for the organizations out there, you want to plan and see how things happen. When we say we don't have money, people, oh no, they might have money under the table somewhere. We don't. And we're really trying to be creative and trying to work with everyone to do that. But that the struggle is definitely real. And as everyone continues to say, we really need our federal partners. And we are fortunate in Westchester to have great ones, both our U.S. senators, Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand, and our congressional leadership team, specifically the head of Budget and Appropriations, Congresswoman Lowy, have been extremely helpful for them. So we're going to continue to work together, and we need your advocacy to talk to those folks to make sure that those resources get brought down locally so that we can help all of you.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Jan Fisher, our fearless, amazing executive director, has joined us as well and will participate in the Q&A. I just first wanted to say, or state the obvious that I know is, shared sentiment here. Human life is first and foremost, and the dollars come next. But of course, we can't ignore, beginning to think ahead. So the work that we've all done, the work that nonprofit agencies have done, and the work that the county government has done to save lives, to protect our neighbors. You guys deserve a tremendous amount of credit and appreciation for that work. And that's what matters first and foremost. That's the precursor to us drilling you on the budget a little bit, but truly. So we did have a session a couple weeks ago with Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Shelley Mayer, and it was great to hear from our senators. We have a session coming up soon with some of our assembly members. We understand that a local government and a county government simply cannot weather this storm alone. The costs are too great and the disruption is too great. So we need our state and federal partners. But is there any more specific thoughts you can share on the revenue picture moving forward and on the county's recovery?
Well, we'll give you a general sense of where we're at right now. And Joan McDonald has tasked Larry Sewell, Gideon Grant from our budget department to prepare a variety of different scenarios, which are all subjective. It's when do we think what things are going to happen. Give you a general idea. It's a $2.1 billion budget. Of that $2.1 billion, about 570, actually 569 specifically, comes from property tax revenues. The property tax revenues so far, we would expect to get a percentage, 60% from the municipals who collect the money on or about May 25th. That revenue stream appears to be solid. In terms of our sales tax revenue, we were fortunate that we had January, February, and part of March that fell before the contagion spread. And we actually had a very good January and February, proportionate to what we would do in January and February. They're generally low months of economic activity. And we cleared the bar in those 2 months. March was not a full month. And we started to see the impact of the shutdown, which occurred 10th of the month. It was round numbers, about a third of the way through. Since that point, we've had a dead fall off the cliff drop in terms of sales tax revenue. Hotel and sales tax revenue is a significant amount of money. It's shy of $600 million as a revenue stream. And we actually viewed that as one of the things that we were able to accomplish last year to give us the wherewithal to spend money on more programs, the money we added this year in the 2020 budget, as well as the stabilization in some financial areas. So sales tax has fallen off the table. It's dropped dramatically. Now, when you estimate for the rest of the year in sales tax, what we're trying to do is to determine, as best as we can judge, when do we think we're going to be back in business and at what level of activity? Therefore, we project how much sales tax, and that will give us an idea of how much gap there is. There's a gap. Now, the gap, I think we've estimated initially to be somewhere as low as 120 million and as high as 220 million. Now, when you hear the state number of 61 billion, the number for Westchester is small. If you talk to a village and they say we have $1 million gap, that's smaller than our number, but it's proportionate to the size and scope of the government, how many people are employed and so forth. So we started the dance hearing numbers on the low end at about 120 million gap and as high as a 220 million gap. What causes that gap? Three basic things. The first thing is, when will we be back up? And the later we're back up, the bigger the gap is expected. The closer we're back up, the smaller the gap is that we expect. So we're closer to the 120 mark if we're back up in, say, July, 1st of July, mid-July. I don't want to go through all the metrics of the governor. That's a worthwhile conversation, when we have other things on the table. If we're not back up in July, or we back up in August, August is not a particularly good month for sales tax. You get to the end of the month and back to school shopping, then you get a nice boost in September, and then October, November, and of course December with holiday shopping is a big month for revenue. If we're back full throat in the society, there's no big second wave. We don't have to reshut the society. That gap is gonna sit around 100 based on what we see. Now, in addition, just so you know the parameters, we did eliminate collecting any fares on our buses. I forget the exact number per month. It is X million a month. It might be 3-4 million a month. I'm not sure exact number, but it's not an insignificant number. We're not collecting fares in the Beeline bus system, and we're protecting the drivers, which is a statement about our workforce and some other things. We don't expect to get the summertime revenue in our parks. We have opened up golf, and that is a revenue producer. But right now, if I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet that Playland would open, and that's a significant revenue generator for the county. And that, of course, breaks my heart because I'm very committed to Playland because it's a recreation for poor people to go to and enjoy, as I once did as a kid. We've lost hotel tax revenue that is not insignificant. And there's some other revenue streams. We don't know how much mortgage activity is going to be happening. Maybe we'll see more by the end of the year. People leave the city, want to be up in the burbs, maybe. Or maybe people sit tight where they live and they don't transact, they don't refi. There's a lot of not knowing. So the revenue side is where the problems are. The feds provided money in, I think, the initial stimulus to reimburse us for COVID-related expenses. So on the expense side of the budget, where we have generated more costs in the health department, more costs in pick a department, which is emergency services department, a lot of overtime there as we do the PPE stuff. We believe many to most of those costs will be picked up. But in the first go around, they didn't specifically say that we can use it for revenue reduction. And then here's the big issue. I know we're in a nonpartisan environment right now. I'll be as nonpartisan as I can. The president may tie further reimbursements, which may be available to the county, to policy decisions. He's made a comment about sanctuary counties. Now, we know we're not a sanctuary county, but we know that this administration, this legislature, with the support of most, if not all of you in the not-for-profit community, we stood by our undocumented residents by passing an Immigrant Protection Act. That is not necessarily the policy that the president wants. And will he tie reimbursements to that policy? We don't know. And if you can predict what he's likely to do, then you're ahead of me, because I sure as hell can't predict it. So when we know that there may be a certain amount of money available to us, we're not sure if we're going to be able to access it. If we can access it, then we can make a better prediction about how we can handle the obligations we've made. And so far, the obligations we've made for the first quarter, we feel comfortable honoring all of those commitments. The intent is to honor all the commitments we've made. Every contract that we put in that budget that we intended to be funded is what we intend to do as long as we have the revenue to do it. And as Ken said, there is a gray factor in the higher level of our budget gap that may come from the state's actions, not just what we lose in terms of revenue. And we're going to, at some point in time, everything's on the table, but we're not going to activate everything. And I'll give you one more example as I over-answer this question. But I want you to understand, because you're intelligent people, what we face and the parameters we face, because we're sympathetic to the things that you're trying to accomplish. We want to work with you on affordable housing. We want to work with you on domestic violence issues. We want to work with you on legal service issues. We want to work with all these things because it's part of our philosophy that government should be involved in these things. The other factor that we look at when we take all these things into account is how are we going to deal with the workforce issues that we have with our workforce. There are people who will say, well, those government employees, they're doing fine. They're still getting their paycheck and so forth. We have a unionized workforce, and I would argue probably the position of most of the NPW members is that the unionized workforce are the worker bees, and they should be treated well, and they shouldn't be treated in a cavalier fashion. The public workforce unions have a different footprint from the private workforce unions, but when we plan to do things, we do them in light of the fact that the nurses union that represents X number of county employees are out on the firing lines. They've been going into people's houses right up close to the contagion and testing them, and when we have decisions to be made, we have to look at our workforce and try to determine if they've been working the way those nurses have been, how do we protect them? And then this travels down the line with our different other workforce, our uniformed forces and so forth. Our probation officers are members of CSDA. They're not uniformed workers. They do work that's similar to law enforcement, but they're compensated through a system that's similar to CSDA. And we have to take those things into account, because if we're going to close this budget gap at the end without the benefit of federal aid, it's going to be a series of really bad decisions, and they will hurt working people who happen to work for the county government. So we're trying to figure out, how do we do this without hurting anybody? So far, we've taken $20 million worth of actions, which basically reverse policies that we put into place with the budget that we thought were good, sound fiscal policies. I said, you shouldn't borrow to pay for pensions. You should be able to put in your budget as an expense the amount that you have to contribute every year to pensions. It's good fiscal policy. We just reversed it. We reversed it, and we're going to pension smooth. Why? Saves us X million dollars off the budget. We said it was good public policy to pay for certiorari claims when they're presented to us by the court. rather than borrow, because when you borrow, you pay interest on top of principal. And we said we don't want to borrow for it. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to borrow to pay certiorari. Why? It's going to save us a few $1 million. And then we said we were going to add to the reserve fund $10 million in this budget. And we just added 5 in the last budget. Why? To build up our reserves for a rainy day. Well, it's pouring outside, and that $10 million, which we would have added, is now part of the reduction to offset the reduction in revenue. So Rich and Jan and the rest of our friends out there, we've made decisions so far that have probably been about $21 million worth of positive impact against that $120 million. So maybe like 100 million at the low end of the spectrum. And we've got other strategies that are short of, the things that you fear: abrogating contracts, reducing contracts, laying off people. Short of that, we're going to try to do everything we can to balance our budget. And we do think that the feds need to step in. And we do think that we need to be protected from having to change our philosophies to suit the president in order to get money that we legitimately deserve, because through no fault of our own, we've lost revenue because we're trying to protect people from getting sick.
Right. Yeah, I think, first of all, just thank you for the big picture on the budget there. That's super helpful. I'm getting a little echo. So Jan, why don't you go ahead with a more specific question?
Sure, love to. So again, it's great to see your faces, County Executive, Deputy County Executive. I think it's really important that you presented us with the business perspective of revenue and expenses. We as nonprofits run businesses as well, and it's important that when we have these forums that we understand the push and pull of the county's revenue and expense streams. We have been doing a lot of advocacy on the federal level to bring money into the state, which would go into the county. Our issue in Westchester is our federal legislators are on board. They are supporting us. We are calling them. We are supporting them. We are worried about the legislators in other states. So I really ask our members, if you have family members living in other states, have them call their federal elected officials, because everybody counts phone calls. So now some questions that have been asked by our members. Just a comment, we all are very, very concerned about our immigrant neighbors. They have been left out of the federal stimulus, and sometimes in a very punishing way when there are mixed status families. If a person who is not documented is on the tax return, that family can't get stimulus money. So we just want to call attention to, and we know that you know and are sympathetic to the needs of our immigrant community. But to start asking some questions that were asked by people on this webinar, when will the Department of Health have any guidance or decisions about summer camp? A number of our organizations are concerned about in-person summer camp programs. Is it possible to get an answer sooner rather than later? And then with that, I hope you can remember both, a few other member organizations are concerned about religious gatherings. Can you explain or confirm the number of people allowed at a religious service? So we have the Department of Health and summer camps, and we have religious institutions that want to know about religious services.
Well, the first most important thing to keep in mind is that the vast majority of things that have been shut down legally have been done by gubernatorial executive order. Governor Cuomo fairly early on indicated that he was going to supersede what executive authority resides in a village mayor, a city mayor, town supervisor, a county executive. So with the exceptions that if his executive order does not cover a particular area of public policy, then all of us have declared emergencies. So that's when the county executive authority would kick in and others. He has been very specific in closing or eliminating camps, day camps, summer camps. And we have been asking in some of the different forums that we have, phone call forums, for a decision on when summer camps could open. I would tell you that I thought we were closer to it until about 2 weeks ago. And when this issue of the Kawasaki-like syndrome disease broke, it
Mm.
a whole nother dialogue, because we were all thinking that COVID wasn't really affecting young people. It was really affecting those of, I have to say us, not you, but us, who are 60 and older, and not young people. And now, because this may be a related illness, it has caused, I think, the state to assess their policy before they open up and allow us to deal with summer camps, either overnight camps or day camp settings, either private camps or municipally or county operated day camps. So we don't have an answer on day camps relating to whether they're going to be open or not. We've asked the question as recently as the last 48 hours. I don't know if we're going to get an answer this week or next week. They do know, I think in one of the last calls, the budget director for the state indicated that he understood that we were reaching a point of no return. And also that it's not just the camp's operation for their own intrinsic value. Obviously, it's a revenue stream to certain organizations. It's also a functional daycare mechanism during the summertime hours when the normal school-related structure is shut down and where kids would otherwise be in school and get off at whatever, 3 o'clock, get picked up or show up at the front door. Now the camp program provides that structure. And if the camp program is going to be shut down, it's going to extend that difficulty going forward. On the issue of religious gatherings, I guess, Ken, from the normal standpoint, you can touch upon the gatherings issue.
For the religious gatherings at this particular point in time, there is no religious gatherings that are allowed right now, other than to do the video conferencing and for the local priest parish, et cetera, to be able to do that, just to produce those. There are no gatherings allowed right now. Yesterday, the governor did talk about Memorial Day, something that the county executive has been working on for several weeks, trying to get an answer to say that that's going to be limited to 10 people, which means no elected officials are going to be able to come, because the 10 people is going to limit it basically to what the VFWs and those kind of things. And you can have car processions. The governor did say yesterday that there was, because a question got asked directly about the religious gatherings. Specifically, there's some religious celebrations that are coming up, some holidays that are coming up, and there needs to be some guidance on that. The governor said that he was going to try to have something by the end of the week, but we don't know for sure. But as the county executive said, it's really from the governor's executive orders that have been limiting those particular ceremonies, religious ceremonies, funerals, et cetera. Those are limited to basically, again, 10 people, socially distant, and a lot of times in cars.
One more point on this, Jen. I read an article in the Hill publication, Capitol Hill, that was a bit disconcerting. They described how a number of churches in the South, and I assume these would be Christian churches, had opened up. The order is open up, and a lot of folks will rely on their religious faith, that will be the protective element and how they can do that. And they have found that in a number of cases, not all cases, but in a number of cases, that has spread the virus, and a number of congregants have become sick. So I would suspect that each religious institution, every institution, starts to make plans of how would we function if given the green light. How would we space out where people would sit? How do we deal with the touching of doors to open a sanctuary? And this applies not just to religious groups, but to any organizational situation. If at some point in time the green light happens and they say, okay, fine, you can have your events, but you have to lower the number of people. And then you might say, well, if we would normally have 2 religious events on a Sunday, we're gonna have to have 4 seatings and spread the congregation out over a larger situation. That may be where it goes. But at this point, we don't have clearance from the state to do those things.
Right. And I think, in all settings, better safe than sorry. And, reopening is not just going to be a floodgate. It's going to be a very carefully managed process, as you're outlining. Unrelated, different topic that keeps coming in is, with so many folks losing work, unemployed, right now we are in an eviction moratorium, but that will not go on forever. Has the county forecasted at all folks that may be in danger of losing their housing down the road, and have any resources dedicated to deal with that issue?
Well, we have Blanca Lopez with us, who, amongst her many portfolios, has dealt with the housing issue. She has a background previously. You all know her from her HDSW days and other things she's done in her career previously. I don't know if Blanca wants to directly comment on this, but the reality is, and we don't know if he's going to extend the provisions longer than the period of time in which it's going to expire, but we do know there's a pent-up demand. In fact, there's efforts being made right now to try to evict people, even though it's illegal to do it. I spoke to a friend of mine who's involved in the court, and they say there are people, you know, that are still facing practical eviction, and they have to, and the landlord has to be reminded that there's an eviction prohibition on now. But we do see the storm clouds. We're not blind to it. I don't know, Blanca, do you want to add to the issue?
Well, you got to come up.
You got to come up. You can sit in my seat.
Here.
Socially distance and all that stuff.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Morning, Blanca.
So a couple of things in the works. One of them being focusing a lot on training, virtual training for our local CBOs under a train-the-trainer type of format to be able for the CBOs to then assist their clients knowing about their rights and responsibilities as tenants. Obviously, there are rights right now under the moratorium. There were rights that were passed in 2019. And we want to make sure that people are reminded of the fact that they cannot be evicted. Any illegal evictions going on right now. The Attorney General has submitted guidelines for local police to address these illegal evictions and how they need to be handled. We have to remind people that they shouldn't be paying more than 1 month's, the equivalent of 1 month's rent for their security deposit. We want to make sure that people know how to stop an eviction. So considering that some of our not-for-profits may not be able to assist undocumented families, we want to make sure that we are also talking to those organizations that can, especially in the field of legal representation, which is sorely needed for these families. The other assistance that we are working on is the fact that our county received funding from CDBG ESG, the stimulus funds. We received, or we will receive actually, approximately $3.2 million that will be divided between our emergency solutions grant, which is eviction prevention, and also our CDBG funds, which will provide assistance to our not-for-profit organizations. The information for these specific programs are currently being developed. Everyone should expect a fact sheet that will include the eligibility requirements, what the purpose of the funds is, how to apply. Those should be ready by June 15th. So as soon as we have that information, our Department of Planning is working very hard to get that information put together, and then we will be more than happy to distribute it. And just on a side note, our CDBG ESG funds is for our 27 municipalities that belong to the Westchester County Urban Consortium. So if any of your organizations live in a municipality that is not part of the consortium and they think they may be eligible for, please contact our Department of Planning, because in order to join into the consortium, the deadline is in June. And we want to make sure as many communities that are eligible to can join so that we get more money from the federal government through the Department of HUD.
And that's a shameless plug for a few organizations that have offices in places like Peekskill, to remind them that this is a great opportunity to do that, to rejoin the consortium. We do have a list that
Yes.
that Blanca and Norma Drummond have distributed to the local municipalities to do that. And again, Rich, the biggest question is, if people haven't been paying their rent from March, in some cases April, for those folks, the real challenge is paying the money for rent. And that's part of the federal stimulus thing that we continue to ask for, the ability to be able to pay direct for those individuals to prevent them from being evicted when they were a victim of the COVID crisis. So there's a lot of challenges that are going on in there, and that's why there is not enough money to be able right now to be able to fund those evictions by paying that. So whether it's June 21st or August 21st, because there's a few different nuances in the last governor's executive order. It's till June 21st unless you are directly impacted by the COVID crisis, and then it's August 21st. So we really got to step up on that. But on the opposite side, from the court system, we've been meeting with Justice Kathy Davidson and her team and talking about that and trying to figure out different ways to be in the community to be able to do this. And that was the creativity that we were talking about earlier. How do we utilize the agencies that should be operating right now to be able to do those virtual sessions and be able to help provide assistance virtually? As the county executive said in the beginning, we've been very creative about saying, hey, if you're providing your service differently, but you're still providing that service, then that's something that people will be able to be compensated for, right? If you're not doing the service at all, that's a big difference, and we have to continue to talk through how that's going to look. So it's definitely something that's on everyone's radar screen. We're all extremely concerned about that because some of those individuals don't live in legal apartments, right? And they're going to get evicted from an illegal apartment. We're not quite sure how that looks at all. And for those folks that are undocumented, as Blanca was just talking about, in COVID, we have not been checking immigration status as we should not. We've been trying to take care of the health issue, but now there's going to be real issues that come back from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich, can I jump in with a couple of things now?
Please.
While they transition. So just a couple of things, some shameless plugs to follow up on some things that were just said. NPW, starting tomorrow, is having a Back to Workforce series, a 4-part series. If you are not on our mailing list, please join our mailing list. We do have some county people that will be joining us on those forums, and certainly every county department has been really helpful to us in coordinating these forums. The Youth Bureau, Office of Women, Mental Health, the county executives team. So we are really thankful for your expertise and for working with us. We have, I do also want to do another plug for the census to remind everybody. We've been partnering really strongly with the county. Everybody needs to be counted, and please go on the county website. It's an amazing website. It's got videos, it's got all sorts of things where we can be creative in making sure that all Westchester residents are counted. So I'm going to follow up with a question about group homes for the developmentally disabled in Westchester. I got a couple of questions on that. And this is in no way to apply that our agencies are not doing an amazing job. We know they are. But we do have a couple of questions about county monitoring of our group homes to ensure that people with disabilities are not being overly confined, and to ensure that abuse, which we know is very, very, very rare, especially in our group homes, to make sure that our people with disabilities are being protected. So,
legitimate concern, and as with most special institutions, New York State has the direct regulatory authority over them. We faced that already discussing nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and it applies hospitals all across the board. We do have an enforcement responsibility at the county level of government. So what I would say the immediate situation would be is identifying particular cases where we think there is a valuable need to go in and take a look. And I don't know, how we determine that, but we have the ability as an enforcement agency to enforce the laws of the state. The reporting responsibilities go from the institution to the state, but the enforcement of the laws are ours. And if we can, maybe offline in a separate conversation, identify some areas where we think there are particular concerns, then we can take particular action. Problem we have, as you can appreciate it, is that the county government is not organized around the functions of general government. We have very specific things we're tasked with doing. So just to give you a completely separate example, we don't have a Department of the Environment. We have a Department of Environmental Facilities, and their task is to run a sewer treatment plant system and be involved in the refuse disposal, recycling, all of which have mandated elements to it. When we decide we would like to have a solar initiative, or we decide that it would be good public policy for food scrap recycling program, we have to create from whole cloth something that's exterior to what the core mission is and staff it and so forth. And that, as an analogy, applies when we're looking at the area of health. We're tasked with implementing the state health department regulations, but the sanitarian function, going into the restaurants, checking out the pools to make sure the pH and all that other stuff is lined up, that takes up, the bulk of the time of those folks. So we need to establish additional extra in order to do exactly what you've identified. And so I think we're going to have to figure out how to take the resources that we do have and apply it when we know that, or when we believe there may be cases of concerns. Those concerns may come from the relatives of people who are in those homes. Those may come from neighbors of the homes that observe things. Although I've noticed that neighbors of places like this sometimes are particularly negative regardless. Again, I'll go back to Blanca when in her prior responsibilities. When we dealt with any of these group homes, you don't always get an honest readout from the neighbors because they really didn't want the home there in the first place. But we're happy to use our enforcement abilities, but I think we have to do that on a case-by-case basis because we don't have the resources to do it across the board. And the group home management does not have to respond to us. We can't say, show us show us numbers and show us data that we can then analyze and say, hey, we see a problem here, and now we're going to proactively go in. So I think if we can figure out how to make that connective, we can use the county enforcement power a little bit more creatively and perhaps along the lines that you're describing, Jane.
And George, just to add in there, because Emily was making sure to remind us again that it's a state responsibility for the group homes that you're referring to. But on the call that we have with the state every day, except for Mother's Day, we had a state call for basically the last 2 months. That is a continued question that's brought up specifically by Assemblyman Avenatti and some other individuals. Steve Otis is another one individual that continues to bring that up, along with Senator Shelley Mayer, to make sure that there is additional focus. But as we've been talking from the very beginning, with the modifications that have gone on along the way, now there's a focus on the nursing homes. And what we can see is that path heading towards additional congregate care, like group homes, et cetera, to do testing. When we've had specific incidents that have come up, that Joe McDonald and the team has handled that with the health department, have gone in and tested basically everybody in those particular homes. And again, the guidance has changed from that state level many different times, and we expect that it's going to change again.
Okay, so we are going to wrap up with one last question. I know that the county executive is up next with Assemblyman Gary Pretlow, who is the leader of the Westchester delegation. An overarching question, nonprofit Westchester Board of Directors clearly stated that it would look at all our services and issues through an equity lens. We are very concerned. A number of questions that have come through really address broadly the issue of disproportionality, as Rich discussed before, the impact of this virus on communities of color that have actually been deadly. So we have a number of questions concerning health, mental health, summer youth employment, so many housing, eviction. They all should be looked at, in our opinion, through the lens of what has systemic racism done to our society. We see examples every day here in Westchester, here in New York, and other parts of the country. We are very concerned about addressing that. Another shameless plug, we here in Westchester and NPW was given a planning grant to partner with the Y and county government to open Westchester's first Center for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. We see that even more critically now, understanding what's going on everywhere in terms of disproportionality. So any comments that you might have on that and anything else that you would want to ask? I again want to thank the NPW Board of Directors and members. I want to remind people, if there are any questions, please call or email me directly. If I can't answer it, I will find the nonprofit or government agency or person that can do that. So we will make sure your questions get answered. You know, our thanks to the partnership with you, County Executive Latimer, Deputy County Executive Jenkins. We are really grateful to live here in Westchester. Some final comments on our most vulnerable being made even more vulnerable by this pandemic, and just really want to advocate for whatever task forces and initiatives are implemented to address reopening, be done with that lens, even in the business sector and every other sector. We're not going to get anywhere unless everybody, public, private partnerships, address this issue. So I'm done.
I think, yeah, no, listen, I think the point you make is one that we agree with. There's a structural problem, not just in Westchester County, but in the United States of America, how we deliver certain services, health being one of them, education being one of them, and other areas as well, that were clearly the reality of poverty and racism extends the problem in each of these different policy areas across the board. We see it, we know it exists. I think this administration, in the 2+ years that we've been in, have looked at, you know, sort of a swath of period of time before us where there isn't enough to build on. We basically have to create the infrastructure for addressing these issues ourselves from day zero. So we've had a couple of years in, and we certainly haven't gotten as far as we need to get. But when we look at what this has shown in terms of the health situation, how long it took for us to get testing into the community where people of color are. We originally started testing because the first original index patient was an individual for whom income was not an issue. And the people that he connected with that spread the contagion were also of a certain level of economics. They were from one of our urban cities, but they were in one of the wealthier suburban-y parts of that city. And people, you know, didn't really see that was the front end of this. Now that we're looking at the long-term impact, it clearly does affect our urban centers and the people who live there, who are disproportionately in this county, African-American and Latino. We're also looking at issues that, you know, are more obviously, you know, tied to policies that involve what the federal government does, because we can look at, for example, neighborhood health centers, and we know that they're there to provide an urban setting of support. And historically, the county provided direct support to the neighborhood health centers, and we have not over the last number of years. That was discontinued before we took office. Now we would have to find resources over and above the ones we have to help restart the engine in funding neighborhood health centers, because they are part of a necessary chain of delivery of health services. The fact that we did not at the beginning of this contagion deal with the you know, the neighborhood health centers as a conduit for delivering testing is, you know, it wasn't our decision, but, you know, the testing began with sort of major hospital entities delivering it, not in the heart of the poorest neighborhoods. So we know that there have been mistakes made, and some have been made because of the urgency of responding quickly, some a lack of understanding. That goodwill may exist, but the lack of understanding is there. So that's why we intend, and I think we'll probably start this process most likely in the month of July. I think in the short term, we have to deal with, you know, a number of issues. But probably in July, we're going to convene a very large group of people in a dialogue to work on task forces. And you will absolutely be at the table individually and collectively to make sure that the not-for-profit voice is available. And by the way, not-for-profit organizations represent all different kinds of services. So if one is a housing service, one involves food distribution, another one involves healthcare, there's a reason not to say, oh, here's one person who represents all of the not-for-profits. These are people within their policy lanes that have a reason to be at the table. And we'll make sure we do that alongside business, alongside academia, and representatives of different levels of government. You know, the challenge is going to be pretty great for us because we are a county that is progressive, in a state that is progressive. I think we need a national government that is equally progressive. And if we can have that kind of top to bottom partnership, then we can do, you and I, we can do on the ground the kinds of things that will matter, knowing that the higher levels of government will help us with resources and in some cases policies, because many times the things we want to do we don't have the legal power to implement. We need the state government to authorize us to do things. So I think, Jan, that there is a real opportunity for us to come out of this working closer together and working together more substantively. And I would, I don't want to jump ahead because I know Joan's already laid some plans out, but I would expect as these plans become public, you will all be asked in various ways to be part of it, bring your ideas to the table. And the one thing you know, which is what this forum does, is we're not afraid to hear alternate voices. We're not afraid to people to challenge decisions we've made, and we'll defend as well if we think it's defensible. And if we think we haven't done enough, I'm perfectly comfortable in a televised situation say, no, we haven't done enough. We can do better. And that sometimes is a little refreshing when you think about elected officials who double down on whatever it is they've said in the past. We want to work with you to make this as good as we can make it. And I'll close just with what I referenced before. I grew up in one of the poorest neighborhoods of this county. I saw as a little boy, all the way up the line, the things that you see every day in the way you deliver services to people. I spent 2 years in my early 20s with my master's degree in hand, what the housing needs were of the city of Mount Vernon when I was housing coordinator, least housing person. And I was in and out of the apartments. I wasn't looking at statistics at City Hall. I was in and out of apartments, interviewing people who needed the assistance. I know inside of me, in my bones, the same things that you understand. Now I'm in a position with Ken, with this team, to do as much as a county government can do. And our heart's in the right places. We have to put our dollars in the right places. We have to put our personnel in the right places. So you have a partner. And if we can get through this immediate, intense healthcare problem, followed by this immediate financial problem, I think we can put ourselves in a partnership that can lock in and can last beyond my personal time in the arena, which is what I really seek. I seek for us to do things that I know long after I'm out of government, I can look back on and say, Westchester is on the right path because we're all committed to that. And it wasn't about an individual. It was about what's right. And we all agreed on what is right. And we locked that in for the years to come. And that's what we're going to try to do with you.
County Executive, thank you for spending some time with us today. More importantly, thank you for your leadership for our whole community and for that commitment to your partnership with our sector. We're definitely, we stand with you and we're excited to continue our work together.
Thank you, Rich. And on behalf of this whole team of people, because it's all of us together, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, folks. Stay safe.
You too. Thank you. Thanks, Rich.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Diane.
Bye.
Diane, how you doing?
Okay.
Nice to see you. It's the only way we see each other
We've
anymore.
never seen
I
them.
know. Now I'm trying to
Look
see
how long my hair is, Diane.
Look at mine. Oh my God. I won't tell you what the roots look like.
As soon as they open those barbershops and beauty salons, I'll race you.
I'm racing you too. Thank you so much.